outside of telehealth. So great topic. Thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, please. Before we get started with our content today, I would just like to remind everybody that CTRC is a grant-funded program. So what that means is we are not trying to sell you anything. We are here for informational and educational purposes. This is a really educational session. You may notice, though, while we are a grant-funded program, we are also part of the OCHIN family of companies. So our speaker today is from our same family. So while she may not be a familiar face for the CTRC world, she is an expert that we know, get to work with, and are super thrilled to have today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenter today, Kelly Schulte, to introduce herself. Thank you.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Kelly Schulte. I'm OCHIN's Change Management, newly minted Senior Change Management Advisor. So this is a picture of my face. A little bit about me. I'm a registered nurse. I've been in healthcare for the last 20 years. I started as a nurse back in the paper charting days, so I am an antique. I've done a lot of things in my nursing career. Most recently, I've been working in quality improvement and in the healthcare nonprofit space. My background in this work, my graduate work was in nursing leadership and management. I have a lot of training, quite a bit of training in motivational interviewing. I'm a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt in healthcare, certified change management specialist, and a certified professional in healthcare quality. I've gravitated to change management specifically over the years because as a frontline healthcare worker, I've participated in a lot of initiatives. And as a nurse, as someone whose job is really rooted in communication and relationship building, the principles of change management really make sense to me. And I see this facet of improvement science as really make or break important to implementing successful changes in our organizations. So no more face. Our theme for this conversation today is really motivating and mobilizing people. So today we are talking about managing people through change because each employee affected by change has to make a choice to work differently and in order to achieve the desired outcomes of a project or initiative, right? So that means you can design perfect processes, you can deliver amazing trainings, you can implement new technology, and there will be really little to no value added to your organization without motivated employees who choose to adopt them. So when we're talking about workplace change, we're talking about a project, an initiative, a solution that you're introducing. And in a broad sense, you're doing this to improve the way work is being done, or to solve a business problem that you've identified, or to seize a business opportunity. And fundamentally, the idea behind all of that is to make things better. So one of the foundations of change management is that we as humans change for a reason, right? That seems really simple, but in the case of workplace change, we're undertaking all of these initiatives, not because it's fun, we have nothing better to do and we need to stay busy, right? But because we see a reason, an opportunity to improve something. And we need individuals to change, to achieve change at the organizational level, right? Which means that organizational outcomes are the result of individual change. So when you're asked why change management, this is why. It's to ensure that our initiatives produce the results we need. If we fail to lead people through change, it means less value realized at every step along the way. So most of us are familiar with project management and process improvement to some degree. And when we're talking about workplace change, it can get really confusing to sort of tease out, well, what are we actually talking about when we use the term change management? Well, aren't we already doing change management? Is it really that important? Is it hard to learn? What value will we bring by giving change management sort of its own separate space when we're talking about improvement science? We use these terms often interchangeably: project management, process improvement, change management. So I think it's important to level set and talk about, which box each one kind of goes in. Project management is technical. It's designing the project, developing the processes, and delivering the outcomes. And the expertise really lives with a trained project manager who delegates work out to teams. And you probably got some familiar faces here, like Agile and Waterfall. And when you think about it, these project management methodologies create ways for people to work better. Change management is about transitioning people, engage the audience, adopt the why, and use the change. And so here, a change management team is creating the framework, but it takes people from every level of the organization to execute your plan. And the methodologies here look at various ways to move people through change. And we'll talk about this later. Process improvement is looking at existing processes or systems, evaluating and adapting them to increase the effectiveness or efficiency. And so process improvement frameworks are everywhere. We use them all the time, right? PDSA cycles, lean, total quality management, and so on. So I think now it's helpful to look at change management sort of from the perspective of an organization. And I like to break it up into 3 phases. So organizational change management, phase 1 is about setting yourself up for success. So establishing a people-centered vision for change that really seeks to understand the impact, deep, efficient discovery to determine readiness, and then having all the right people coming together to create a documented change management plan. Phase 1 is really start developing your overall strategy. So what is the strategic vision for the change, which clearly defines scope, future state, and outlines measurable goals? And so at this point right now, how ready is the organization? How does our change align with existing values? How much change is already happening? How much resistance do you anticipate? And it's really very important to assess at baseline, what is your organization's history with change? So you can fold that into your change management plan. You want to identify or engage a change leader who's going to lead your change management implementation and activities, and establish or activate a change team who will support and enact change efforts in partnership with your change leader. And as you think about resources, do you need to dedicate specific resources to change management in your organization? Who's on your sponsorship coalition? Who's leading it as executive sponsor? And we'll talk about that in a little while. And do they have what they need to be effective? In phase 2, we're turning strategy into action by mobilizing change champions and stakeholders, creating proficient users, installing and leveraging feedback networks. So that looks like launching communication efforts as outlined in your change management plan, using multiple delivery methods, and ensuring that the message focuses on the reasons behind the proposed change. Keep the change team and other stakeholders really actively engaged through meetings regularly, using user feedback and concerns, reviewing those with the change team, and resistance management activities should be documented, delegated, and closely monitored. So you want to communicate frequently, assess staff proficiency, and gauge when your organization is ready to stand up your new program or stand up changes to your existing program. You'll notice if we talk about things from an individual perspective, that these themes and activities can overlap quite a bit. And then phase 3 is the opportunity to look at the results of your work. So once transformation has taken hold, strong transitions, measuring performance to goals, and leveraging opportunities for learning, individual development, and continuous improvement. So this looks like collecting performance and usage data to determine whether the change is being adopted successfully. I'm staring into a light. There we go. And we'll talk about how to measure change in just a minute. To sustain change, it's important to celebrate the efforts involved in a successful change implementation on any scale. Change champions can transition in their roles to become team or department level coaches and mentors, and they can continue to socialize and support your new processes over the long term. Information regarding change should be really well documented and easily accessible. So there should be a process in place to keep all of your new materials updated. Change team members who manage the change lifecycle are going to transition that ownership of the new processes and tools and knowledge to all of the appropriate roles for ongoing maintenance. And then you want to formally debrief on strategy and implementation. You want to apply what you've learned to inform future change planning. So there's a lot to be learned from implementing any change, right? And if you're working to implement or scale telehealth services, like that's a tremendous amount of work. And a lot of that can transition into learnings for how to implement future change more effectively. So how do we measure change? These three measures are what I refer to as change management value metrics. So if you were stuck in an elevator with me and you said, Kelly, why is change management important? This is what I would talk to you about. I would pin you in the elevator and I would scream at you about these three value metrics. This is how people do the work of change. This is how we measure it. And this is how applying change management, how planning for people makes it all come together. So adoption. This is what happens when the change has been broadly put into place. And when you hear people talk about change management, they often talk about spread. And that's really what we need here. Oftentimes, this is where a project will close out. And when this happens, you can have a problem with sustainability. Essentially, all we've done here is give people a new thing. If we're using the example of telehealth, if we stopped here, what would that look like? And you can see some examples on this slide. Technical implementation is done. You've got your staff trained and policies are in place. This is a lot of work. This is a lot of change, but there's still a big gap here from being here to improving outcomes. With utilization, the correct people are using the change, right? So you have the work here where you want it, and you have systems in place to verify the work is actually being done in the new way. If we were to stop here, we know people are using the change, but do we have any idea whether the work is being done correctly? We're closer to outcomes, but we're not quite there. Again, we have some examples on the slide. We know staff is actively offering telemedicine and a target number of visits have been transitioned to virtual. We can see closer to influencing outcomes, but we still don't have anything that tells us about quality, right? So proficiency is the gold standard of change. We have it, we use it, we've mastered it. And as a result, change produces the expected outcomes. So now we do a great job of screening patients. We're asking questions and counseling. The thing I kind of want you to have in the back of your mind is if you're stuck, if you're involved making a project plans and you need to write and you're stuck on measurable objectives, these three questions are what you want to be asking. So the examples here are training and staff education continue regularly with best practices and ongoing improvement. Patients and providers report a certain level of satisfaction that you've set with telehealth services, and they're consistent with in-person visits. So here we've achieved a really tight bridge from process to outcomes. It's really difficult to make that leap from adoption to outcomes without these other two. So how do we implement and lead change? What change management behaviors are the greatest contributors to the success of an initiative? Here we have best practices. These come from ProSci. This data is really helpful and effective because comes from 20 years of benchmarking data that we can use. It comes directly from change practitioners. So what they tell us is the first thing that is helps us make successful change is active and visible sponsorship. It's the top contributor to successful outcomes, and it is in fact named 4 times more often than any other factor. These are sponsors that demonstrate support throughout the project lifecycle. They engage in change activities, and they influence their peers to buy in and remain supportive. Using a structured change management approach provides structure and shared language. And when you have a formal process, it's more likely that the change management strategy will be applied consistently throughout your organization. Ideally, the method you choose will align with your organizational culture, it will match your change initiative, and it will allow you to adjust sort of needed over the course of your initiative. So it's a flexible methodology. When you think about communication, the important factors are consistency, transparency, cadence, and the use of multiple communication channels. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a while as well. You want to customize your messaging for each impacted audience. Employee engagement relates to change management work by engaging folks and soliciting their feedback, involving them in identifying solutions, and leveraging people as change champions whenever possible. Acquiring and maintaining resources for change management really matters, both with hands-on resources and people. Knowledge and experience is really important, and dedicating that specifically to change management expertise. Collaborating early with your project management folks, that makes sure that you're clearly delineating roles, avoiding duplication of work, and unifying your efforts. And then embracing middle managers as change leaders, that's really important, considering their reach managing change and the large number of direct reports they might have. So when we talk about executive sponsor and sponsorship coalitions, it can be fairly common when you're introducing an initiative to have executive leadership do early communication, generate interest, and sort of lay out the high-level plan. What can also happen is to lose visibility of that person as your project moves forward. When leadership moves on, it sends the message that the project's been deprioritized. Your momentum can slow, and then resistance can start building. It's really important to get senior leadership and people managers on board. Your folks have to understand the why, and your executive sponsor is responsible for the vision of your initiative. Why are we doing telehealth? Why is it important for our patients and our organization? And why is that important to me? It's also really important for other senior leaders and people managers to get on board. Why do they need to care about this telehealth initiative? If one senior leader or even a mid-level manager is allowed to be ambivalent towards your initiative, it sends the message to everyone under them that it's okay to opt out. And that can become really problematic as it flows down to your frontline staff, right? So you really need your executive sponsor to create that coalition of peers and managers and have visible accountability for the folks that push back from the start. Strengthens the support you'll get. They're the ones that are going to set the expectation and enforce that at the leadership level. Their commitment to a project really does have significant impact, as we saw on the slide before. It's also equally important that this is a consistent message from a consistent person. So it's not as effective if you have multiple executive sponsors or that you're changing out that role mid-initiative. So another really important part of your change management infrastructure is the team you build to support your initiative and understanding the responsibility that each participant has. So we've already talked about sponsorship, but what else will they do as part of your change team? They align your resources, they oversee progress, they keep the participants accountable, they serve as bridges across project teams so they can help break down organizational silos and understand cross plays and sort of enterprise dependencies that'll exist within an initiative of this size. But they're not team members from the standpoint that you really want them pulling up a chair at your meetings and contributing ideas and influencing group opinions. And what I mean by that is they're providing resources and operational insight, but you really want to avoid input that drives a top-down change. Your solution designs are going to be much more effective and easier to implement when they're co-created by the people doing the work. Your team leader has a specific responsibility, and that is to keep the team on track to meeting outcomes. So they need to provide hands-on direction and structure to make sure the works team is outcome, the team the work is doing is outcome focused. Change champions are opinion leaders. They could be providers, nurses, a member of leadership, an end user, whomever. They are your well-respected members of staff, and their expertise is such that their participation lends credibility to the team and to the project. So maybe they're your technology early adopter. Maybe they're familiar with the platform you're implementing. Maybe they've done a similar patient-facing initiative before. But by virtue of participating, they are going to make everybody else more comfortable and more likely to buy in early. So they're going to support your initiative out in the organization and help integrate the change into the social structure. A process owner is a leader who's directly involved with frontline staff or end users, and their responsibility is to maintain the change down the line. So this usually means they have authority or direct supervision over frontline staff, and they're accountable for whether people are doing the work correctly and they're doing it long term. So they play a large role in proficiency. A facilitator is someone with no formal authority over team members, and they're not really considered a team member either. They don't have a vested interest in the outcome. So maybe they're there as technical experts, they're a vendor partner, they're somebody like myself who might be there as a coach or consultant. There's someone whose role is simply to stay neutral, but problem solve, facilitate certain meetings, and so forth. And finally, your team members. Critical players. They're your actual representatives on the team. They handle the nuts and bolts. They're there to provide meeting content, create processes, help make decisions. And these most of the time are people directly affected by the change. Frontline staff, providers, other clinical staff, and direct supervisors. So when you're considering team members, you want to consider all of your relevant stakeholders and the skills necessary to create a really cohesive team. Okay, can she click the buttons? There are many models of change, and which one you choose depends on the type of change, the people involved, the magnitude of the behavior and the attitudes you need to understand or impact in order to be successful. And each of these models of change has unique applications. You've also got models that can help you understand how information and innovation is spread throughout your organization. So you may want to partner a change model with an innovation model, such as Rogers and the Institute for Healthcare Improvement Framework for Spread. So it's you can choose your own adventure and figure out what works best for you and your organization. When you're planning your communication strategy, you have one opportunity for a first impression. So you want to think about every group that's going to need to be made aware of the change. When the change takes effect, whose work is going to be impacted? What do they need to know? And when do they need to know it? And what I like to think about is who is going to be directly impacted first. Next, consider who manages them. What do they need to know? Are they owning new processes? Are they onboarding future staff to this change? What policies need to be created? Who trains the impacted staff? Who builds the training? Who owns the training? There are so many questions that need to be asked as you start to unfold. I think of it as a picture that keeps getting built as you ask more and more questions to uncover what is the true impact of the change that you're proposing. Which type of messaging is going to be the most effective for each of those groups? What communication timeline is going to be most impactful to each group, and which communication methods will work the best? For those of you who have a hybrid workforce, this is going to take some additional thought and planning. If you're not specifically including your folks at home, they may not be getting enough verbal communication. So you really want to make sure you're folding in anyone who's not your typical 9-to-5 in-office employee. And it's really important to remember that at this point, when you're thinking about your first impressions, you don't want to focus your communication on the solution you're proposing. And so this is an example of where change management deviates from project management and quality improvement. This isn't about processes or systems or tools. You're taking the time to really prepare your people with foundational information about why change is coming. So this is not the point at which you communicate how you plan to roll out your program, your timelines, what your objectives are in terms of milestones or data. You're talking about what unmet need exists, why it's important to address it now, and why a telehealth program addresses these needs. You have plenty of time to communicate tactical stuff down the line, but initial communications should address the why. And then the final piece is to not assume that people understand. Even with a really intentional communications plan, you're not going to meet the needs of everyone. So how can you create a pathway for questions to come in and out and consistent information to go back out to the folks who are asking questions? And again, being really intentional about equity if you have a hybrid workforce. So just to give you a quick idea of what a communication plan might look like, I actually like to do this in a spreadsheet, so I have a really dynamic and movable and infinite space to do this, but this encompasses all of the things that we discussed, the message, the method, the timeline, and it has documented ownership for each of those pieces. But the most important thing is that this is a document. So it's more than just discussing this, it's actually documenting this and being accountable to it. Okay, so I get lots of questions about resistance. And if we're going to lean into the idea of working with resistance, then you should think about what those behaviors are so that you can recognize them and communicate and document those into a plan as well. So the behaviors you see here are in order from most to least observed as part of a resistance management study. And I won't spend a ton of time on examples, but think about some of these behaviors, your current change that you're working on right now, and the people or groups where you might be seeing some of this. So disengagement was the most common form of resistance behavior observed at 81%. So being indifferent, being apathetic, having low morale, ignoring communications, and then negativity. I suspect that this probably resonates with folks. And then the bottom four are much less common, but can be much more disruptive and are noticed more in leadership groups. So something to note. Over the last 20 years, as I said before, ProSci has been conducting these benchmarking studies with change practitioners and change leaders to help make recommendations for best practice. And so the most recent benchmarking report that came out was their 11th. And this is the information that they provided in regards to reasons for resistance to change. So the most common reason that they cited for resistance was lack of awareness. This happens because of failure to communicate the details, the business reasons, and an employee's role in initiatives. And this happens when there's an inability to answer what's in it for me. Folks also resist change when it results sometimes in an undesirable role change. So they maybe foresee an increased workload, a new job description, there are new expectations for their behavior. It is very common to resist when they don't want to learn a new technology or system. So technology is a big barrier and something to think about when we're talking about telehealth. There's not enough time, no incentive. So again, time is a four-letter word when we're talking about change. But again, when you're thinking about implementing systems, is time going to be a barrier, particularly in terms of training? Fear and anxiety is a big cause of resistance. There's fear around organizations experiencing culture shifts. Another big reason for anxiety is that folks won't have the ability to learn the new things that are being asked of them. Did I not change my slide? Oh no. Okay, never mind. With a new program, there's a lot to learn and a lot of pressure to get it right the first time. So this can cause a lot of anxiety for folks. We also talked about how leaders can influence the attitudes of their reports. And so this ties into lack of support. Middle managers are the group most likely to be resistant of workplace change. And like we said, that poor behavior modeling spreads to the front line. So previous negative experiences can create an environment where employees feel a lack of support, and they don't always trust their leadership's ability to get them through future initiatives. And then finally, employees who don't have a voice in the design of new processes will resist out of pure frustration. So when you're not included in something, you can feel left out or diminished. And so folks who are doing the work, they really want to be part of designing that work. It's not realistic to give every single person a chance to touch the new work, but the process by which decisions are being made, in that case, needs to be very transparent so they can feel a sense of involvement. So I want to talk really quickly about this piece of data. I get a lot of questions about resistance, and most of the time they're about influencing frontline staff. But what this shows us is about 2/3 of resistance is being reported as coming from leadership groups, and the majority of that is coming from mid-level managers. And I think there's an interesting reason behind that. They're a little bit different in the reasons they identify, and the biggest of that is organizational culture. One of those reasons within that is being risk averse, having past bad experiences, and really not feeling like they have strong sponsorship from their leadership or strong support from their leadership. So managers have a really big challenge during change initiatives because they have to navigate their own personal transition. They're in charge of translating messaging from the top to their direct reports, and then translating the needs of their direct reports back up to leadership. So they really carry a very heavy workload in terms of change leadership. And so that can translate to a feeling of resistance in large change initiatives. There's also issues on the project management side when there are aggressive timelines or difficult metrics to meet. So that's something to think about as well. And then another very important point is that managers really worry about their inability to be change leaders. So, this is a learned skill, managing resistance, communicating difficult information, working to upskill their direct reports, having coaching conversations. All of this is very difficult. And so one of the things they report is concerns around being able to do that well. So very similarly to a communication plan, this is how you might approach a resistance management plan. Again, I like to do this in a spreadsheet, so I have plenty of room and I can move everything around. But again, this is more effective when it's a document rather than a discussion. You can delegate it, talk about where you are in managing resistance, and you can also document lessons learned. So barriers to change management itself during initiatives. Participants in the benchmarking study that I've been referencing said the number one thing they would do differently in their next initiative would be to get their executive sponsors engaged at the beginning of the project. And that aligns with what we've been talking about all along, that sponsorship is one of the most critical factors you can have in being successful in meeting your change objectives. So what they said was folks that their sponsors didn't understand the role of being a sponsor well. They didn't understand the resources required or sometimes even the purpose of the change, which meant that their sponsors weren't communicating consistently and not providing enough transparency. And a lot of that really goes back to the why. And they also identified the really common issue of sort of that dwindling sponsorship visibility after the official project go live. Without effective, transparent communication, folks get confused and misaligned, and then change leaders have to spend a lot of time and resources providing role clarity and communicating expectations and re-encouraging project buy-in. Folks are most likely to resist change when they don't understand the change and they're not comfortable moving into an unknown future state. And so they'll have limited engagement and they'll be less willing to adopt your new processes. They report a lack of understanding about what change management is and then they don't really understand why it's an organizational value add. So that makes it difficult to channel resources specifically to change management efforts. And then things that lower trust and engagement within an organization and create a change-resistant culture are previous failed change, a very siloed work environment, large amounts of resistance, and internal politics. So that requires a large-scale shift sort of an employee mindset, but also a full leadership commitment to address overall culture. And again, your executive sponsor can really be helpful in breaking down some of those silos and communicating across organizational departments. So how do we ensure, sorry, I just skipped right over that last one. So how do we ensure our change has sustainability? Well, ideally, the speed at which people are experiencing change is the speed at which your organization is moving through the project implementation. So this is an example of when the project has reached its post-implementation phase and simultaneously reinforcement activities are happening. So this is the trajectory of a successful project. Change management activities and project management activities are really closely aligned. And this happens when your change management team and your project management or team or project manager have been really highly collaborative throughout, so that everything has sort of reached the end stages together. How do we continue sustainability? Through appreciation. Appreciation fuels really high performance. Your folks are inspired by acknowledgement and appreciation. And to a certain degree, we all perform for acknowledgement, right? Giving recognition tells people what you're doing is really good. We want you to keep doing that. So it's a great way to set expectations and convey your organization's values. What you acknowledge and reward tells people what matters to you and also to your organization. And when our environment becomes more positive, we start to build more personal resources. We become more curious and optimistic, and over time, that makes us better able to cope during times of stress and in environments of ongoing change, which I think is sort of where we're landing as a culture. And when people are appreciated and they feel seen, they feel more safe. So it encourages them to think outside the box and oftentimes be more open to change and help contribute to creative problem solving. So celebrating milestones, more often than not, a genuine expression of appreciation from a person who knows your work is really effective reinforcement. But when you want to recognize a group or celebrate the milestones that you've worked really hard to achieve, you want to be really intentional about how you do that. So you want to make sure you all are at an advantage. You know your people. You want to make sure that your celebrations are targeted towards the folks and that you choose things that are really meaningful to them. And you want to make sure, again, that you include your folks who may not be in your organizations in person. So folding in your hybrid folks. Organizational achievements are the right time for your executive sponsors to come back with some authentic recognition. And that helps your organization as a whole know, like, we are still doing the thing that we said we are doing. So it keeps everybody on track in terms of transparency and communication. So finally, just to wrap up our key takeaways, we want to make sure that communication is planned from the perspective of both the sender and each potential audience. You want to plan and to have resistance to your change and be proactive and develop strategies to manage it. And also be open to the energy that comes from resistance. It's something that you can really leverage and turn into motivation. Your executive sponsor plays a hugely important role in your change initiatives. Organizational culture will impact how information is received and spreads, and what kind of resistance you're likely to have. The change you're planning determines the scale of change management. So large organizational initiatives really need a large and holistic change management strategy. Your solutions, your technology and processes are going to have less value to your organization if people don't adopt them consistently and long-term and with high proficiency. Change is a process. And so if you plan for it in that way, you can help make the transition happen more smoothly. And that's going to make you much more successful in meeting your objectives and have more quality outcomes. So this slide says questions. What questions do folks have?
Thank you so much, Kelly. Hopefully we'll get a few questions submitted. While people are typing, we're going to launch a quick poll, so please give us some feedback while you're thinking about what questions you want to ask. It's always so nice for me to hear this presentation, and really, I think what gets me is like the change team thinking about that, because we have, for CTRC, we have like our telehealth champions is what we call them, and they're kind of those change leaders. So seeing how that relates. And also I love to think about why people are resistant and the why behind that. And so that's always really interesting for me to think about and apply to my job and how I think about stuff. So thanks. Cool questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for providing your feedback. Don't hop off yet. We have a little bit more to share with you before you go. Okay, I do see one question in the chat asking about any particular talking points for executive leaders versus clinicians and support staff.
Are we, if we're talking specifically around change management and sort of introducing that, I think if we're talking to executive leaders, the three things that as I said before, my elevator talking points are really around change management value metrics and going from sort of the traditional idea of adoption to proficiency. I think that takes the idea of change success to the next level. And that's really what we're going for. So for me, I think that's just the most critical thing. I think for other folks, clinicians and support staff, one of the things I frequently encounter is the idea that resistance is the enemy of change, or the biggest barrier to change. And that resistance, I think, is one of the biggest opportunities in change. We can learn so much from the folks who are providing resistance, particularly what I like to call constructive resistance. A lot of times that comes from folks with deep subject matter expertise or previous experience. And so we have an opportunity to learn from that and improve the work we're doing. So I would say for those folks, sort of realigning our thought that resistance is bad and looking at that more as an opportunity to leverage folks who are already engaging with the change and seeing what we can learn from them.
Great. Awesome. Totally agree. Lots of agreements. You've gotten some great feedback and appreciation in the chat on your presentation. While we're waiting for a few more questions, do you mind if we go to the next slide?
Oh, sure.
We can share. Just want to, again, along the lines of educating and informing, we want to let you guys know of an opportunity. If you enjoyed the education from Kelly and our friends at OCHIN, you may want to take advantage of this other opportunity from OCHIN's Health Center Control Network. They are the largest health center control network. Anyone can participate for all FQHCs, FQHC lookalikes, anywhere in the country, all EHR platforms. OCHIN's HCCN is super awesome, great learning, no cost, tools, training, and partnership to really support you. So I just want to share this opportunity. If you'd like to learn more about HCCN, check them out. And on the next slide, so we want to share some upcoming events for CTRC. So this was our office hour today. If you want to come to our next one in January, we're going to be focusing on school-based health, school-based telehealth, and what that has looked like in the past, where is it going, and what can we learn from it? So join us in January for school-based telehealth office hour. And then in February, we have a super, super cool opportunity for you to learn about remote patient monitoring. This is going to be a half-day event, full day of learning, super, super awesome lineup of presenters and subject matter experts in that one. So that's going to be fully focused on remote patient monitoring. So if you'd like to join us, registration is open. We have a beautiful program available for you to learn more about those events. And if we have any more questions, we're here. We can take them. Yeah, hope to see you at our next event. Any other questions for Kelly or the CTRC? Now is your time. Thank you all so much for being here. Well, thank you, Kelly. Do you have any final thoughts or words for us? Or
No, thank you everybody for attending. Appreciate all your questions and feedback.
Right. Thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your expertise. We appreciate it.